Hello and welcome to StationCharlie. My name is Charlie and today I will show you the first approach in my new Awesome Approaches series. I will be flying this series in Microsoft Flight Simulator using a variety of aircraft. For today's Awesome Approach though, I will be flying the Phoenix Airbus A320 and the approach I'll be showing you is the RNP Foxtrot approach onto runway 05 at Queenstown in New Zealand. The airport designator is NZQN. This is a spectacularly scenic approach and is quite tricky as it involves a visual circuit at the end of the approach surrounded by some very high terrain and gusty winds. While I was setting up for the video, I realized the departure from 05 is just as spectacular as the approach to it, so I decided to show you the entire flight from takeoff to touchdown. Let's have a quick look at the plates for today's flight. Here we have the RNAV standard instrument departure that we'll be using today. As you can see, there is quite a bit of high terrain surrounding Queenstown. The runway and initial track after takeoff is 054 degrees. Then we'll be following the points in a spiral climb over the airport before heading out to the north, where we will pick up the arrival procedure back to runway 05. This departure has several speed constraints, which helps to force a steep climb to get above the surrounding terrain. There are several altitude constraints as well, and we'll talk about them in the flight. Here's a quick look at the standard terminal arrival route that will take us to the approach itself. As you can see, we again have several altitude constraints, and the GPS waypoint where we switch to the RNP approach is waypoint Ibabu. This is the chart for the RNP Foxtrot approach, which can be used for both runways 05 and 23. This approach ends at the missed approach point called QN581. The approach then switches to a visual approach, as you can see in the lower right hand corner here. We will plan to arrive at the missed approach point at 4,120 feet, which is the minimum descent altitude. Can't go lower than this unless we have the runway in sight. And that is about just under 3,000 feet above ground level, as you can see there. If we have the runway in sight at this point, we will then initially descend to a circuit altitude of 4,000 feet while we follow the arrows on a right-hand visual pattern for runway 05. We have to stay north of this imaginary line here, so we'll use the ground features to make sure we don't stray south of it. Alright, here we are, lined up on runway 05 at Queenstown, New Zealand. Some beautiful mountain scenery around this airport and the town. Beautiful sunrise waiting for us as we take off straight ahead. And we've got some light left-hand crosswinds blowing. Alright, so let's hop in the flight deck and get this flight going. Alright, so here we're in the flight deck. The aircraft is set up for takeoff. Everything is sorted. We have a FC altitude window selection of 16,000 or flight level 160. We have 11,000 climb magenta, so it's one of the first altitude constraint on this departure. I've selected terrain on ND on my side. And we have packs off for maximum performance departure. Release the park brake, feet on the brakes. Right side stick forward. We're going to stabilize 50% on the engines. Engine stable, brake release. Setting toga. Man toga SRS, auto thrust blue. Through 80 knots I'll release the forward pressure on the stick. Slowly. 100 knots checked. V1 handoff thrust lever. Rotate. Positive climb. Gear up. Nav. AP1, autopilot 1 is on. Waiting for thrust reduction at 2660, which is 1500 AGL. There we go, lever climb. Thrust climb, auto thrust. Turn the pack 1 on. Start the timer, wait for 10 seconds before we turn the other one on as well. Beautiful sunrise coming up over the mountains in the distance. Oh, that's more than 10 seconds. Back to on. Right, now we're accelerating to the first speed constraint of 160. That's thrust climb climb. 3000 AGL acceleration altitude. I'm going to maintain 160 all the way around to this position 852, Quebec, November 852. Then accelerate to 180 knots, then 195 further. And we'll retract the flaps once we're accelerating to 195 here, above the flap retraction speed. Beautiful snowy mountains out there. Really stunning area, this part of New Zealand, it looks like. See the airfield there on the left side, on the edge of that lake, in between the rivers. Some beautiful terrain. A lot of snow on the mountains. Microsoft Flight Simulator really does shine out of the box in terms of terrain with no add-ons. You can see the location is following us around this departure. Let's have a look. Get a passenger view here over the engine, turning out the airfield. Beautiful mountains. We're past the 160 speed constraint. We're now accelerating to 180, and we have 1,000 feet to go to the 11,000 magenta altitude constraint. Then after that one, I believe it's 12,000 max altitude, and we'll leave the flaps out. Flaps config 1 plus F for now, so we accelerate. And 12,000 feet is roughly 10,000 above aerodrome level here. So then we'll retract the landing lights. Speed alt star, 11,000 magenta, and climb is now armed again, climb blue. And we're about to pass this point, it's just going to kick in. There we go, 12,000 alt magenta, thrust climb, climb. And we're accelerating above flap retraction speed there. Alright, flap 0, speed checked, flap 0, disarm the speed brake, runway turn off lights, and nose wheel light off. Speed alt star, 12,000 magenta, it's the next speed correction altitude constraint, and then climb blue is armed. Continuing the spiral climb to get above the terrain. And then once we're past this point, we'll accelerate to climb speed. Alt constraint. So we'll look outside here. Very nice shot of the airfield there. And the approach. Alright, so when we come around for the approach, we'll be on base on that valley, turning final here to the missed approach point somewhere around here. Right, we're accelerating now to 322 knots, climb speed, still sticking at 12,000 feet, altitude constraint to that point, METOX, then we'll climb to our cruise altitude. Alright, so we'll come around the final approach here. Missed approach point is somewhere in this vicinity, around here. Final approach. Once we're at that point, we have to fly over it. We'll disconnect the autopilot and we'll fly a visual approach through that little mini valley around the terrain, making sure we turn downwind before the edge of that point. Come around here and do a visual approach. Right-hand visual approach onto runway 05. Definitely a bit of gusty wind up here. You can feel the bumps. 31 knots from the left-hand side, 320. 30 degrees off the nose at the moment. 12,000 feet, yeah, we can actually turn those landing lights off. We'll leave the passengers seated and leave the display on constraints as well as the terrain on the ND there, as we'll be starting the descent and approach very shortly. Once we're past this point, we'll continue the climb. Alright, since this is a not to scale section that GPS is not going to give an accurate location, we can set ourselves up for the arrival so long there. So it'll be basically a right hand turn, ELRUV down to Ekvox, Kazlu, and then all the way to Ibabu where we start the RNP 05 Foxtrot approach, or the RNP Foxtrot approach, and we'll do a visual onto 05. Okay, that is transition altitude. Come on, finding these click spots. There we go, standard. Cross-checked, and I'll leave the standby altimeter on the QNH to reduce a bit of workload with single crew flying. We'll be starting the descent soon anyway. Beautiful lakes out here. Alright, alt cruise now, we're at level 160, and we can start setting up for the descent. Got our approach blade set up. Speed arrow let po. Right, as you can see here, we have the ELRUV 2 Alpha star for runway 05, transitioning onto the RNP Foxtrot 05 via position Ibabu. Quebec November is hard-coded on the RadNav page. We have, let's set up the threshold here. Runway 05 for a direct to distance. Oh no, NZQN, not NZNQ. QN05. 28 miles direct to the threshold. The perf, I've already set everything up for the arrival. I've got arrival data, the approach data. QNH 1026, temperature's 12. I've got a crosswind from the left around 350 at 10 knots. That's pretty gusty. On that climb out you could feel it. Then the transition flight level 150. I'm going to leave the V app there for now. It did feel quite gusty. We can always just pop in and add 3 knots or so, just to get a bit of clearance, get a bit of margin in case it's very gusty. Before we go, so I've set the barrow up for 4,200 feet. Sorry for the view there. I'm freezing and unfreezing my TrackIR as we go. Alright, so the MDA there for this approach is 4,120 feet, so we're not allowed to descend below 4,120 feet. And the barrow here I've set up 4,200, so we'll get a minimums call from the aircraft at 4,200, so that makes it effectively a decision altitude. So if we decide to go around at that point because we don't see the runway or for whatever reason, then we can select go around, and as the aircraft will still have some descent momentum, it'll descend slightly below 4,200 and hopefully not more than 80 feet then, so that we don't bust that 4,120 MDA. Right, thrust reduction we've set at 1,500 feet. Then acceleration, in the event of a go around, acceleration altitude will be at the go around altitude of 10,000 feet, so you can see there. And then in case we lose an engine and have to do a single engine go around, that's a 3,000 acceleration altitude to clear some of that terrain. Alright, fuel wise, we have plenty of fuel. We've got 6,200 pounds, an hour and 24 minutes extra, and the alternate I've just put in 2.0. We've got a final reserve of 30 minutes. It doesn't really matter for this flight. We'll just copy the primary into the secondary as a backup. The landing performance calc. And before we do anything and before we forget, we'll select medium auto brake. Alright, so we're going to use medium auto brake. It's a dry runway. We'll use 350, 10 knots, 12 degrees, and the QNH is 1026. And the landing weight will be about 130,000 pounds. And it'll be a bit below that, just add a little bit more for a bit of margin. Medium auto brake, we'll use max reverse, manual landing, flap full, and auto thrust will stay on. So we have the margin for that, and hopefully Phoenix will upgrade this eventually to calculate a V app so you can cross-check it with your performance page for the approach. Alright, so we're basically set up for the approach now. We'll activate the approach phase a bit closer, and when we're on manual speed, or selected speed rather. Let's just talk through the approach itself. Let's look at the arrival. Alright, so we're about to turn onto ELRUV, then head to Ekvox, and then Kazlu, where we have a speed first altitude constraint. We're already at 160, so that's basically where our descent will begin. Alright, so over here, Kazlu, before we start the descent, I will select 250 on the speed, and we'll be configured at least flaps 1 before we hit Ibabu, just to reduce the workload on single crew. So look at the approach itself. I'll set the descent altitude to 6,200 feet, which is, as you can see here, let me just get the appropriate zoom. Goosas is the final approach fix, so 6,200 feet is where we'll set the window and leave it. We'll select a flight path angle rather, track FPA and flight path angle -3 degrees until we get closer to the missed approach point, and we'll be configured flaps 2 before we reach Goosas. We'll configure for that. We'll do flaps 2 all the way down to the missed approach point. We have to fly over it. As you can see, it's a circle around the waypoint. That means a mandatory fly over. When we're about there, we'll disconnect the autopilot to make sure, obviously if we have the runway in sight, which we should have with the conditions today, we'll disconnect the autopilot. We'll fly this visual track around in between these two high points. Terrain right and visual, as I showed you as we were taking off earlier. We'll turn a right downwind into a right base, making sure not to exceed basically the line from that point to the edge of the terrain over there. And then as we start descending here in base, we can configure further with gear, flaps 3 and flaps full to be stable by 500 on a visual approach. So yeah, let's see, we're inbound to Ekvox now. Set up 6,200 feet in the altitude window, have it ready. 6,200 feet, we'll take it back to 1,000 increments. And now we just wait a little bit longer until we're at just before Keslu. We'll engage a managed descent. It should constrain it to 160 there. And then it'll manage the constraints all the way down. Let's have a look again at what this looks like out the left side. Beautiful scenery. Alright, so they're returning for Keslu. And anyway, like I was saying, so because it's a constant rate descent basically all the way down, we're going to select manual selected speed 250 to slow it down just before we start the descent itself. Otherwise we're going to have a tricky time slowing it down with no level off segments on the way down to the runway threshold. And when we get to that missed approach point, the circuit altitude here is 4,000 feet, so we'll maintain 4,000 feet until we are turning on that right base, right downwind, and it'll be on managed speed as well. Right, 10 miles to Keslu. I'm not going to set up the threshold on that side. I'll just have that side on perf as well. Alright, let's select the speed 250 while we're level. We'll start decelerating and we'll help with some speed brake on the descent itself. Alright, we're at Kozler. Descent. Set manage speed. We know we're going to leave it selected for now. Descent, fly level 86, alt magenta. And the reason that magenta constraint there is not the same as the next one is because the aircraft is calculating will be above or at least within those constraints for the above and below. Will be above those and below that one, above that one by the time we get there. So it's only constraining the next one that it calculates will be level before that point, which will be there by I think it was Tev, I can never remember these names. Letpo, that's the one. Alright, we have transition. Alright, QNH 1026 cross checked, and we're passing 14,800 now. Activate the approach phase. We're on the selected speed so that it is out of the way. Approach phase is activated. We're not using the landing system or the ILS or landing system indicator there, as we'll be doing track FPA. So we're back, we beam the airfield on very long left downwind, or very wide left downwind rather. We could descend a bit faster here and try and slow down by leveling off, but I'd prefer single crew as well, not giving myself too much work. Pretty gusty up here, as you can feel. Seat position here, my TrackIR, comfortable spot. Right, we're about to go to Ibabu, so now we can start slowing down a bit more. Let's go to 210 knots. And we're coming up 10,000 above aerodrome level. Landing lights on. Seatbelts already on. That's already on constraint on both sides. Terrain is already selected. Engine mode cell is normal, and oh, I did forget to select below on the TKs a bit earlier. It's not the end of the world. We're not flying on VATSIM at the moment. Right, position your bobber. Right, flap 1, speed check, flap 1. From here, let's just manage the speed. Go to S speed over there. I'll still have to use speed brake, I think, on this base before we get to the final approach fix, before we select flap 2. Watch that speed doesn't run over the max flap speed. Okay, I'm going to select half speed brake. Very gusty up here between all these mountains, to be expected, I suppose. Still got 8,600 alt magenta. Since we've changed over to QNH, that now shows 8,600 instead of flight level 86. There we go, beautiful reflection off the lake there. There's a lot of gustiness here. Alright, 500 feet to go. Okay, I'm going to stow that speed brake now. Oh, the engines kick in to maintain S speed. And about 0.3 miles or so before guest house, we'll hit the track FPA button, select minus 3.0 on the FPA, and just fly in down like that. And we can set the go around altitude then at 10,000. Alright, we can already see the runway from here, so it's not going to be an issue. So we're going to descend right down to 4,000 feet. Circuit altitude, but we'll stay on the RNAV track all the way down to the missed approach point. Four miles inbound, flap 2 speed checked, flap 2. From here we can actually select speed. I should have turned that first, accidentally clicked. There we go. Speed 160 selected. We'll manage the speed again when we're a bit lower. And waiting for 0.3 miles. For now we can actually select this, track FPA. A little bit closer, and we'll pull FPA. A little bit high, so let's pull now and select minus 3.3. FPA minus 3.3 degrees. We're about 400 feet high here. Let's go to 3.4. I'll help a bit with speed brake. Go on altitude 10,000 set. I want to go that. Speed brake stowed. $2,000 to go to level off. Got runway visual. We're not gonna worry about the MDA now. The minimum's 4,200. I'll go straight to circuit altitude. Can cross check altitudes here at 3 miles 5080. 4 miles 5400. Yeah, we're now a little bit below. We can set it back to about 2.9. And then let's just leave it at 3 now. Alright, so from here I'm going to disconnect the autopilot now, so that we can level off. Flight directors are going off. I'm going to set the runway track. Current altitude's already set. I'm going to manage the speed. I'm just going to follow the path through the missed approach point, although we are already visual. Five minutes to go for the circuit altitude.
Above.
Checked.
Minimum.
And continuing visual. Okay, it's 100 to go. Let's level off. Let it fly at F speed now. Decelerate to F speed. Okay, we're a little below. But his engines kick in. Right, we're at the missed approach point. Start the right turn down this first valley. Let's get back up to circuit altitude. Small, slow climb. There we go. Not the end of the world. We can go slow, very slight descent now. Otherwise we're going to end up high. It's quite a tight circuit from the looks of it. Try not to do more than 3 degrees. So if you put the tail of the bird, the flight path vector there on the horizon, that's about 3 degrees.
2,500.
Alright, so we need to stay between this point and the edge of that terrain. And check 2500 on the radar altimeter. And 234 will be downwind. From here, let's select gear down while we have some time. I'll probably get a terrain warning there. Let's turn the terrain off. Just try and remember to put it on once we're on final. Okay, speed checked, flaps 3. And yeah, I'm gonna have to set a VAP a bit higher, so let's make it 136. Let's add 4 knots there. See, the runway is just around the corner there. Flap full, speed checked, flap full. Landing checklist, ECAM memo, landing no blue, and cabin is ready. Continue this descent, end up a bit high. And ground speed mini is struggling to cope with this wind. So at least it's all over the show.
1,000.
Okay, we're a bit low, 3 red. level out a little bit. There we go, on profile. 3 wide, correcting. Want to be stable by 500 feet. There we go, now go under the slope here. There we go. A little bit high, correcting. Okay, let's turn that on for the go around. On my track, still a bit high. Let's go in a bit.
Forty, 30, 20, retard.
Crosswind. Okay. Spoilers. Reverse green. Decel. 70 knots. Manual braking. Let's use this turnaround point to backtrack. Alright. We're back to forward idle. Oh, let's taxi it back, backtrack. Runway 23. Well, we'll get that APU started, because the apron, once we turn off, is right there. And we'll disarm the speed brake, retract the flaps, turn the radar off, etc. once we've vacated. This Phoenix does seem to drag a bit. On idle, she's not accelerating much. You kind of have to keep a bit of power on, it seems, in the Phoenix. See, the speed decreases there, and the ground speed. Let's keep adding a bit of power. I'll keep a bit of power on. Alright, start the APU now. Alright, stow that, turn the TCAS off, weather radar off, terrain is already off. I don't have a marshaller, so I'm going to cheat a little bit to get on the actual stopping line here. Thanks for flying with me, and I hope to see you again soon. Don't forget to hit the subscribe and bell icons so that you don't miss out on the next awesome approach.